There have been many ice ages in Earth's history when vast territories were covered with ice and the climate became unbearably harsh. The longest of these lasted more than 100,000 years, and humans had to face incredible difficulties. It was a time when survival depended on every decision made. Without modern technology, our ancestors faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable. They lived in conditions where every day could be their last, where food was scarce and cold was a constant companion. But humans not only survived, they continued to evolve, learning new skills and adapting to changing conditions. This ice age was a real test that shaped us as a species. Today we will talk about how ancient people survived this harsh time and what allowed them not only to survive, but also to continue their journey towards civilization. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how primitive people managed to find food when they were surrounded by ice. In conditions of permafrost, when caves were few and far between, primitive people learned to create unique dwellings from materials at hand. Instead of the usual caves, they used glacial caves and natural depressions, which they then reinforced and insulated. They used bone meal and fat to create building mixtures, which allowed them to erect strong walls capable of withstanding strong winds and frost. The entrance to such shelters was made as narrow as possible to keep the heat inside. They also used dugouts, which were dug into the ground and covered with skins, moss, and branches. Such shelters were warm and reliable, as the earth was a good insulator. It is impossible to imagine how our ancestors, without tools or knowledge of construction, created shelters that saved them from certain death. It was a true miracle of engineering that allowed them to survive in conditions where there seemed to be no chance of survival. In addition to dugouts, they built dome-shaped huts from the bones of large animals, mainly mammoths. The frame was made from tusks and long bones, which were fastened to each other and then covered with skins sewn together with tendons. Such huts were not only sturdy but also well insulated, as the bones and skins did not let the cold and wind through. An entire tribe could fit inside such a dwelling, and a fire in the center provided heat and light. Another unique construction method was the use of ice blocks cut from frozen rivers or lakes. These blocks were used to build igloos, which were very sturdy and provided good protection from the wind. The temperature inside the igloo was significantly higher than outside, allowing people to stay comfortable even in the most severe frosts. This method required special skills and knowledge of the properties of ice, which speaks to our ancestors' deep understanding of nature. All this suggests that primitive people did not just survive, but adapted to harsh conditions, showing incredible ingenuity. They used all available resources to ensure safety and comfort for themselves and their community. This knowledge and these skills were passed down from generation to generation, becoming part of the collective wisdom of the tribe. What other materials do you think primitive people could have used to build their homes? Write about it in the comments. To survive the Ice Age, ancient people needed warm clothing. They used animal skins, which were processed and sewn together with bone needles and sinew. Clothing was multi-layered, which created air pockets that retained heat. The inner layer was made of thin leather, and the outer layer was made of thick fur, which protected against wind and cold. Processing the skins was a complex and lengthy process that required certain skills and knowledge. The skins were first cleaned, then treated with fat to make them soft and waterproof. This process was incredibly labor-intensive, but it was vital for survival. Clothing was not just protection from the cold, but a symbol of craftsmanship and survival. It was a true work of art that demonstrated man's ability to adapt to the harshest conditions. The creation of layered clothing was a key invention. The inner layer, which was close to the body, was made of soft, tanned leather that wicks moisture away and prevents chafing. Above it was a layer of thick fur, which served as the main insulator. The airspace between the layers acted as a thermal barrier, preventing heat loss. In addition to thermal insulation, multi-layered clothing provided additional protection against injury. In the event of a fall or impact, the layers of skins cushioned the blow, reducing the risk of serious injury. This was especially important when hunting large and dangerous animals. Complex clothing also had social significance. The more complex and skillfully made the clothing was, the higher the status of the person in the tribe. Clothing decorated with bone beads and embroidery was a symbol of the skill and importance of its owner. Thus, clothing was not just a means of survival, but a reflection of the culture and social structure of primitive society. Our ancestors understood the principles of thermoregulation on an intuitive level, using knowledge gained from centuries of observing nature. They realized that to survive in harsh conditions, they needed more than just clothing. They needed a real protective system capable of coping with any challenges. Humans learned to protect themselves from the cold. But what if clothing and shelter could not save them from another, more insidious danger: dehydration? In prehistoric times, water was no less valuable than food. But how to get water when you are surrounded by ice? Let's talk about this further. Obtaining water in permafrost conditions was one of the most difficult tasks. All sources were frozen, and it was impossible to melt ice without fire. Ancient people used unique methods to obtain water. They collected snow and ice and placed them in special containers made from animal skins, which they then heated using their body heat or the sun's rays. This method was slow and inefficient, but it allowed them to obtain water. More advanced tribes used special stone vessels that were heated over a fire. They placed ice and snow in these vessels, which melted quickly. This method was much more efficient and allowed them to obtain water in large quantities. However, it required fire, which was not always available. Thus, obtaining water was a constant struggle that required ingenuity and resourcefulness. They also used natural sources such as ice cracks and underground streams that formed under the ground. These sources were difficult to access, but they provided them with clean and fresh water. These were real treasures that only the most experienced and observant members of the tribe could find. In addition, primitive people used animal fat to obtain water. They could melt the fat in containers and then use it as fuel to heat ice. This method was effective because fat burned for a long time and gave off a lot of heat. It was especially important when firewood was unavailable and the need for water was acute. Another method was to use solar energy. People made small depressions in the ground and lined them with dark skins. They placed snow or ice in these depressions, and the dark color of the skins attracted the sun's rays, which helped the snow and ice melt faster. This method was less reliable as it depended on weather conditions, but it was simple and accessible at any time. Thus, obtaining water was a difficult task that required creativity and knowledge of nature. People used all the resources available to them to provide themselves and their communities with this vital liquid. Their ingenuity and observation skills allowed them to survive in conditions where there seemed to be no chance of survival. During the Ice Age, when food was scarce, preserving it was vital. Ancient people used the cold as a natural refrigerator. They dug deep pits in the ground where the temperature was low and placed meat and fish there. These pits were real warehouses where food could be stored for a long time. They also used salt, which they extracted from salt lakes and mineral springs, to salt meat. This allowed them to preserve food even longer and protect it from spoilage. Salt was an incredibly valuable resource that was used not only to preserve food, but also to trade with other tribes. It was one of the first commodities to have high value in the prehistoric world. It was these methods that allowed ancient people to survive periods of famine when hunting was unsuccessful. They could rely on their reserves, which gave them confidence in the future. In addition to using cold and salt, ancient people mastered another important method: drying and smoking meat. This process was particularly effective for preserving large game, such as mammoth meat. The meat was cut into thin strips and hung over a fire or in the sun. The smoke from the fire not only dried the meat, but also added flavor and prevented the growth of bacteria. Dried meat, or jerky, was lighter and more compact, making it ideal for carrying during a nomadic lifestyle. It was also more caloric, providing people with the energy they needed for long journeys and hunting. This method required careful control of the process, as the meat had to be cooked thoroughly without burning or remaining raw. Ancient people also used fat to preserve food. They could render fat from animal carcasses and use it to preserve meat. Meat covered with a layer of fat was protected from air and bacteria, allowing it to be stored for long periods of time. This method was especially important for storing meat during warm seasons when cold storage was not available. All these methods were part of a complex system that allowed ancient people to fight hunger and ensure their survival in the harshest conditions. They were the result of observation, ingenuity, and practical experience passed down from generation to generation. What do you think was the most difficult part of preserving food in prehistoric times? Maybe how to preserve a whole huge mammoth or something even more complicated. Stay with us to discuss this question further. During the Ice Age, hunting large animals such as mammoths, woolly rhinos, and cave bears was the main source of food. These were dangerous and risky endeavors that required coordinated work and strategic planning. Ancient people used traps and bone spears to deal with these giants. Mammoth hunting was key to survival. One mammoth could provide food, clothing, and building materials for many months. It wasn't just a source of food, but the center of the tribe's life. Mammoth hunting was a solemn ritual that required skill and courage from every member of the tribe. After a successful hunt, the carcasses were cut up with stone knives and scrapers. Meat, skins, bones, everything was used in the household. Nothing went to waste. It was an art of economy that was vital for survival. Bones were used to make tools, jewelry, and building materials. Hunting mammoths and other large animals was not only a means of obtaining food, but also a key factor in the social organization of primitive society. It required coordinated work and a clear division of roles. Each member of the tribe played their part. Some drove the animal, others set traps, and others killed it. This cooperation helped to unite the community and strengthen its hierarchy. In addition, hunting large animals stimulated the development of new technologies. In order to cope with such giants as the mammoth, people needed more sophisticated tools. They learned to make sharp spears with stone and bone tips, as well as traps that could hold such a huge animal. This led to an increase in the complexity of tools and accelerated technological progress. Mammoth hunting also had spiritual significance. The animal was considered sacred, and hunting it was a solemn ritual accompanied by prayers and ceremonies. People believed that the spirit of the mammoth had to be appeased in order for them to catch it. After a successful hunt, celebrations were held, during which people thanked nature and the spirits for the generous prey. Thus, mammoth hunting was not simply a means of survival, but a complex phenomenon that influenced all aspects of primitive human life: the economy, social structure, technology, and spiritual life. It was the driving force behind progress, which allowed our ancestors not only to survive, but also to thrive during the Ice Age. The Ice Age stimulated the development of tools. Ancient people learned to work with stone, bone, and horn, creating sharper and more effective tools. Spearheads, scrapers for processing hides, and sewing needles appeared. All these tools were essential for survival in harsh conditions. Special attention was paid to weapons. Spears and arrows with stone tips were the main tools for hunting. Their manufacture required skill and patience. Weapons were not just tools, but symbols of strength and courage. Their possession gave humans superiority over nature and other species. The development of technology during the Ice Age was a direct response to extreme conditions. The need for more effective tools for hunting large animals and processing their carcasses was the main driver of progress. People realized that their survival depended on the quality and functionality of their tools. This led to the careful processing of materials, which had not been so critical before. For example, to make spearheads from flint, people used a technique called pressure retouching. Using bone or antler tools, they pressed small flakes out of the stone, which allowed them to create thin, sharp blades. This method required precision and experience, which speaks to the high level of skill of ancient craftsmen. In addition to hunting tools, everyday tools were also developed. Skimmers for processing skins became more convenient and effective, which simplified the process of making clothes. Needles made of bone were thin and strong, which made it possible to sew clothes from several layers, which, as we have already mentioned, was key to survival in the cold. This leap in technological development was not just a coincidence, but the result of adaptation and a constant search for new solutions. The Ice Age was a harsh teacher that forced humans to think and invent, laying the foundations for all future technologies. Why do you think such a leap in technological development occurred during the Ice Age? We'll tell you all about it very soon. The answer will be very hot. Fire was the only source of heat during the Ice Age. It kept people warm in caves, allowed them to dry their clothes and cook food. Fire was also a powerful means of protection against predators, who instinctively feared flames. It provided light during the dark hours of the day, allowing people to continue their activities and feel safe. Fire was also used to disinfect water by boiling and to process materials. For example, heating stone made it more brittle and easier to work with. This allowed for the creation of more sophisticated tools. Fire was a key factor that allowed humans not only to survive, but to thrive during the Ice Age. The ability to control fire and keep it burning for long periods of time gave humans a unique advantage over other species. People could now not only keep warm, but also dry their clothes and shoes, which was critically important in a wet and cold climate. Wet clothes could cause hypothermia, while dry and warm clothes could save people from certain death. Fire was also used to disinfect water by boiling it. Although ancient people did not know about microorganisms, they noticed that water heated over a fire became safer to drink. This was especially important in conditions where access to clean water was limited. Drinking boiled water reduced the risk of infectious diseases, which in turn increased the chances of survival. The use of fire as a source of light allowed ancient people to see the world in a new way. Nights were no longer a time of complete darkness and fear. People could work, socialize, and relax when other animals were forced to hide. This gave them an advantage in the struggle for survival and stimulated the development of social interaction. The light of the fire created a special space around it where people felt safe and could concentrate on important matters. In addition, fire was used to heat dwellings in severe frosts. A bonfire in the center of a cave or hut raised the air temperature by several degrees, making it much more comfortable to stay inside. This was especially important for those who could not find shelter from the cold. Thus, fire became not only a means of survival, but also a factor that improved the quality of life of primitive people. During the Ice Age, social ties became even more important. Survival depended on the unity of the tribe. People helped each other in hunting, building dwellings, and caring for the sick. Communication became more complex. The first languages and symbols appeared, which were used to convey information. People gathered around the campfire to share experiences, pass on knowledge, and strengthen bonds. It was a time for stories about the past, plans for the future, and the transmission of traditions. Social ties were a guarantee of survival, allowing people to feel safe. Life in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age required not only physical strength, but also intellectual development. The ability to communicate effectively and coordinate actions became a key factor for successful hunting and defense. The development of language allowed people to convey complex ideas and plans, which significantly increased their chances of survival. They could exchange information about the location of prey, dangers, and resources, which made them more efficient and organized. In addition to verbal communication, primitive people also used symbolic forms of information transfer. Rock paintings were not just art, but a kind of chronicle and teaching aid. They depicted hunting scenes, images of animals, and maps of the area, which helped people navigate and pass on knowledge about the world. These drawings were the collective heritage of the tribe, preserving and passing on the experience of past generations. The development of social structure was also driven by the need for collective survival. Within the tribe, there was a clear division of roles. Some were hunters, others were gatherers, and still others were craftsmen. This specialization made the community more efficient and resilient to the challenges of nature. People worked together, helping each other, which created a sense of unity and mutual support. Thus, the Ice Age became a catalyst for the development of social ties and communication. It forced people to unite and work together, which ultimately led to the formation of complex societies and laid the foundation for our entire civilization. Despite the harsh conditions, primitive people created art. They painted hunting scenes, images of animals, and symbols on cave walls. This was not just decoration, but a way to express themselves and convey their beliefs. Art was a key element of their spiritual life. They also made jewelry from bones and stones. These were amulets and talismans, which they believed brought good luck in hunting and protected them from danger. Art was a symbol of the human spirit, which was not broken by the difficulties of the Ice Age. The art of the Ice Age was not just a means of self-expression, but a key tool for survival. Rock paintings, for example, were used for teaching and passing on knowledge. Elder members of the tribe could show on cave walls how to hunt mammoths, where to set traps, and how to butcher the carcass. It was a kind of visual guide that helped the younger generation learn the skills necessary for survival. In addition, art had magical significance. Ancient people believed that by drawing images of animals on cave walls, they gained power over them. The drawings were a kind of prayer or spell that was supposed to ensure a successful hunt in the favor of the spirits. It was not just art, but a ritual aimed at increasing the chances of survival. The creation of jewelry and amulets also had a deep meaning. Bone beads and pendants were not just decorative elements, but symbols of status and belonging to a particular group. Amulets carved from bone or stone were considered talismans that protected against evil spirits, disease, and danger. It was a kind of psychological protection that gave people confidence in their own abilities. Thus, the art of the Ice Age was a multifunctional phenomenon that influenced all aspects of primitive man's life: education, religion, social structure, and psychological state. It was a reflection of their inner world, which was not broken by harsh conditions, but, on the contrary, became richer and deeper. The main secret to survival during the Ice Age was the ability to adapt. Humans learned to adjust to changing conditions, find new solutions, and create new technologies. They were not simply victims of circumstance, but active participants in the struggle for survival. The endurance and perseverance that were necessary for survival in these harsh conditions shaped the character of modern humans. We can say with confidence that this period laid the foundation for our civilization. Survival during the Ice Age required incredible endurance, both physical and psychological. The constant search for food, the struggle against the cold and predators, all of this trained the body and strengthened the spirit. People learned patience and perseverance, qualities that became key to their survival. They knew that if they didn't give up, they could find a way out of any situation. In addition, the Ice Age contributed to the development of collective consciousness. Survival alone was virtually impossible, and people were forced to unite in tribes to face the challenges of nature together. This led to a growth in solidarity and mutual aid. People learned to trust each other, distribute responsibilities, and share resources. Collective labor and mutual assistance became the basis for the social structure and culture of primitive society. It was a time when the human mind was at its most active. Every day was a new challenge that required original solutions. People learned to analyze situations, predict events, and invent new methods of survival. This process developed their cognitive abilities and intelligence, which ultimately led to the formation of a more complex brain. Thus, the Ice Age was not just a period of hardship, but an era that shaped humans into the beings we know today. It was a harsh teacher that forced us to become stronger, smarter, and more united. We have learned how ancient humans survived the longest Ice Age in history and why they not only survived but continued their journey toward civilization. It was a time when humanity faced a challenge that seemed insurmountable. Without modern technology, our ancestors were able to survive thanks to their ingenuity, adaptability, and incredible endurance. They learned to build shelters from mammoth bones, sew warm clothes from animal skins, preserve food in the permafrost, and use fire as a universal tool. This period became a real catalyst for progress, forcing humans to develop their intellect and social connections. It was during this time that the first complex tools, communication systems, and elements of culture appeared. The Ice Age was a harsh teacher that shaped our character and laid the foundation for all future achievements. Without this trial, we would never have become who we are today. What other skills besides adaptability do you think were important for survival in prehistoric times? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.